It's my pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Ebony Sloan-Clark. I had the pleasure of actually talking with her about a week ago, sitting down and hearing her story. And she's going to talk about how an opioid addiction in her family's life really showed her true bravery and courage and led her to be the incredible woman she is now. Welcome, Ebony.
Good morning. I don't have a fancy PowerPoint, don't have flashy slides, I don't have a clicker, but what I have a story, and I'm here to share my story. But before I share the story, it's powerful looking out. The room is full, and I can feel the love, the passion, the energy. This is a blessing to me, so thank you. As I thought about what I wanted to speak to this morning, I thought and thought and thought, and I couldn't get this image of a little girl about 5 years old, riding in the back of a 1984 CJ4 red Jeep. And riding in the back, bouncing and swaying. It's windy, it's dusty, it's out on a country road, somewhere between Hillsboro and Banks, Oregon, up in the mountains. This little girl has to hold on tight. She has to hold on tight to the handlebar because it's bouncy. They're going fast. There's these turns. She has to hold on tight because if she doesn't, she's gonna fall out. She might bump her head. She has to stay alert. She has to be prepared for the unexpected. She has to hold on tight. It's hot outside, maybe 85 degrees, maybe even 90. But she was having the time of her life. She could smell the country air. She just felt free being in the open. She could smell the water. She could hear the birds. She could feel the heat of the sun beating down upon her skin. Guess what? I bet you know. Who was that little girl? That little girl was me. I share that image and I share that story because I am an African-American woman who was born and raised in Portland, Oregon. And that was one of the first memories that I have as a little girl. But what's interesting about that memory is that marked the beginning of a very unique and rich experience. That memory was a time where my mom, she was a heroin addict. And when she made a decision to get clean and sober so that she could get her kids back, she went into this program. It was, the name of the program was Freedom House. It was maybe the late 70s. It was one of the first residential alcohol and drug treatment programs that even considered catering to the African American population in Portland. This house, it used to sit on 21st and Weidler, and it was one of those old historic homes. I remember thinking that the house was haunted, but it was such a beautiful home. And on the weekends, what we would do is we would go out to this log cabin about 15 miles outside of Banks, Oregon. And part of the goal was to experience life. And it wasn't just my mom and myself and my older brother, it was the entire program. It was a program of men and women who were trying to recover and take steps towards healing. It was about maybe 30 individuals and about maybe 2 African Americans, and these are all adults. But then there was a handful of kids, me, my brother, and then another young boy who I call my cousin. But I want to mark that as a unique experience, just because what we know is that a lot of African American children growing up in the inner city of Portland don't have the opportunity, whether it's out of fear, to step outside of their community. And so I had this unique experience of beginning to experience the world and beginning to figure out, how do I navigate that? But that was because of my mom stepping into her journey of recovery. My mom, she always shares this story, reflecting back on when she was 17 years old, and waking up to her mother who passed away the night before. And at 17 years old, you could imagine what that was like. And that marked the beginning of my mom's struggle with trauma, anxiety, depression, and suicide ideation. And because at that time, there was not any intentionality around thinking about, what does it mean to be an African American person in Portland, Oregon? And what does that overlay when it comes to recovery and treatment services? And so at 17 years old, she had no hope. She had no support. So unfortunately, she turned to drugs. And that started her life course of beginning the use of heroin. Fast forwarding, around the age of 22, I believe it was, that's when she had me. And I was born drug affected to heroin. I was premature, and my mom shares the story with me that the doctors were shocked and so appalled because they had never seen such a sick baby. And I have no memory of that. But because of my mom's resiliency and because of my mother's commitment and because of her persistence and her willingness to not be held down by her shame, she gave something back to me. I grew up listening to her stories and other stories. And those stories were such a gift because it's what given me these tools that I didn't even realize I had to navigate the world and to navigate the pain that I would begin to experience. The story of my mother is a story of mine. And it's a story of healing, hope, and recovery. What I learned throughout my upbringing has shaped my experience. And with that comes a deep sense of faith in God, because I know that nothing's impossible for me without my God. I have this ingrained sense of responsibility to speak up, a responsibility to create space for others, a responsibility for equity, a responsibility to speak up against the institutionalized racism that we see play out in our healthcare system, and a responsibility to be vulnerable and a responsibility to take risk. And that's why I'm here today. I've learned that without communication, you can't build trust. And now without trust, you can't develop a relationship. And without trust, you cannot succeed. We have to learn how to trust in ourselves, and we have to learn how to trust in others. And I just want to touch on trust, just especially for those of us who are providers or clinicians. So often people come to us vulnerable and in a broken state, and they're trusting us to support them. They're trusting us to believe them. They're putting their hope in us. And so with that, how do we trust them in terms of what they say? And so how do we make sure that we hold space for that? I've learned that you have to create a level platform where everyone's voice can be heard. And this is something that's important to me because as an African American woman, born and raised in Portland, Oregon, that's the lens that I navigate and walk through the world. You know, and I'll say that, you know, sometimes people will say, oh, I don't see color. You know, I see everyone's the same. Well, my color is what gives me strength. My color is what gives me healing. And my color is what helped me withstand. I remember I was maybe 6 years old and we were down in Seaside and we're just walking on the beach and this little girl comes up to me and she's telling her mom, she's like, mommy, chocolate. And I'm looking like, chocolate? Like, where's the chocolate? and then it dawned on me, I'm like, oh, she's talking about me. And it was one of those, that memory is a memory that I had where I remember like, oh wow, like my skin, my color is significant and it makes me different. That's when I realized early on that I'm not the same. It's one of those first memories. But another memory though, that speaks to my resiliency that I have to share is that my family likes to bake and my mom had a family friend over who was white and we were baking and then all of a sudden some flour got on my arm and he was like, Ebony, you're turning white. And I started crying. What does that tell you? It tells you even though I had these messages that I was inferior, even though I had these messages that I'm different, I still wanted to be who I was. And I always hold and I always reflect that. When I think of the word grit, I think about tenacity. In terms of having a strong determination, I think that we all can reflect back on our different stories that have shaped who we are. And I bet you a lot of it had to do with tenacity, and that's why you all are here today. I think about passion. I think about emotion, a strong emotion. I even dare to say an uncontrollable emotion. And without passion, we can't influence, we can't make that change. I think of strength. I think of the power and the force that we have internally and externally. I think of a willingness to endure. We've been through so much. The people that we support and serve have been through so much. And we all have this place of pain and grief, but we endure throughout. I think of courage, the strength in the face of pain and grief. I think about persistence, action in spite of, and then you get to fill in the blank. I think of the inner strength of a woman. And as I look out today, I think of all of you. When I think about the word grace, I think of my mother's story and what she endured. I think about the stories of hope that I get the honor to hear and hold every day because of what I do. I think about who we serve and who we are. And even though we endure, even though we have to walk through this pain, even though it's this constant balance, we do it with finesse. We do it with poise, and we do it with elegance, and that's the grace. But most of all, I think about compassion and forgiveness. To me, that's the true foundation of grace. And it starts with how do we have grace for ourselves so that we can have grace for others. And then healing keeps coming up already throughout this morning. And healing is the process of making or becoming sound or healthy or well again. And that's what it's about. It's about our healing. What does it mean to be a woman? We are caretakers. We are the doers. We see, sense, and feel. And boy, do we do it strongly, right? We solve problems. We create and we innovate. And we love, we care, and we nurture. And then I'm sure that we could continue to just add more and more in terms of what we do and who we are as women. And I say all of this to say because it's the epitome of grit and grace. And as I spoke to earlier, being a Black woman in Portland, Oregon, I naturally have to hold space for thinking about race and equity. And I think it's important that we celebrate our uniqueness and our differences. So, because far too often we're told that if you're not like the dominant culture, if you're not like dominant society, then something's wrong with you. You're not normal. And what we know is that our uniqueness is what gives us strength. And what we know is that when you put all of the differences together, you make magic. How do we leverage our traditions and values through our culture? And we all have a culture. Whether you're Black, white, brown, we all have a culture. And how do we incorporate that into our healing? And how do we incorporate that into the healing of others? As Genevieve spoke to earlier this morning, what we know is that women in Oregon have the highest rates of depression and some of the highest rates of alcohol use. As she spoke to earlier, we know that women are twice as likely to attempt suicide than men. And we know that women in Oregon have higher rates of childhood trauma. We know that mental health affects women very different than men. Oftentimes, because of how we're socialized as women and as females, as young girls, that plays into a lot of our struggle with emotional wellness. We tend to be the primary caregivers in our family, and with that brings significant stress around balancing the multiple roles that we play. And because of all those things that I've mentioned, I'm here to say that our mental health matters. Women's mental health matters. We all have a story. We all have an experience that drives how we navigate in life. We all have a story that inspires and motivates us. And I just want to encourage all of you to continue to take time every once in a while to reflect back on your story, on your why. Dig deep. Don't forget. Our role is to bring our experience, our lived experience, our knowledge, and our voice into the center of healing and providing care. We have a responsibility to ourselves and we have a responsibility to others. And we have a responsibility to bring our whole selves. And what does that mean? It means something different for each one of us, and that's what's beautiful. I get to show up in the skin that I'm in, and that's amazing. How do we leverage our lived experience to engage and ignite and activate the healing? I am honored to say after 19, almost 20 years of working in the field of behavioral health, both in the nonprofit arena and the public sector, I'm the director of Multnomah County Mental Health and Addiction Services Division. And that means something to me because it's that system that helped and held my mom as she walked through her journey of recovery, healing, and hope. During my process, what have I learned in my 20 years? I've had to learn how to trust myself, and I've had to learn how to value myself. I've had to learn how to trust and accept others, and doing it through a lens of grace. And this one is important just because I'm sure most of you guys don't think that I'm almost 43 years old. My husband tells me that I don't look as young as I think I do, but I think I do. And so with that, I have experienced a lot of challenges and barriers to be a Black woman, and to be a Black woman at a young age doing what I do. And I can think about all the different times that I experienced these promotions. I had to go through so much. I was undermined, and I was undermined by people that I loved, people that I looked up to, both men and women. And it was tough, and it hurt. But it's about the grit, and it's about the grace. And so when I was asked to be a speaker, I was like, yes. Can I get a t-shirt? And so what else did I learn? I learned that our collective differences are what makes us strong. I've learned my strengths, my limitations, and the areas that I need to develop in. I've learned to listen to myself. I've learned to listen to others, and I've learned to listen to my husband sometimes. He's not here, so I can say that. Don't record that. And I've learned to pay it forward, because that's what we do as Black folks. Can I get an amen? And I've learned to grow from my mistakes. And I've learned to understand what's the source of my motivation and energy, and how do I leverage that. That said, we are all human. We all have feelings and emotions. We have highs and lows. We have unique experiences that make us who we are. And that's the foundation of our resilience. How do we hold space for grace? How do we hold space for grace for ourselves and for others? And this morning, I want to invite you to step into your healing. I want to encourage you to lean into your strength. You are not alone. We are not alone. There is hope, and that is evident by every one of you who are here today. So thank you.